So this is George Robertson, and George, aside from being the sound designer on the production, is also what we call the dramaturg, or sometimes the dramaturg. And George is a Greek scholar, and probably the only person, well, certainly the only person in this room who can read ancient Greek. George, can you talk to us a little bit about the concept of translation, how and why people do the translations, and the students that are looking at this are reading a translation, one of probably many translations of this play. Just talk about the process of translating the play.
Well, every play has got to be translated over and over again. It will depend on the time in which the translation is done, the kind of language that they use, and also the preoccupations of the individual translator. And we're working with a translation which in many respects is very good, but in some respects, as we go through it, and I'm there to compare it with the Greek text, I think it's a little bit off the mark. Sometimes the words that are chosen by the translator are perhaps not reflecting all the nuances of the Greek, and sometimes indeed the translator is using a different text, because of course these plays were transmitted in a manuscript tradition, and not all the manuscripts agree with each other, and various scholars have various opinions about which words, which manuscripts are better for some passages and which are better for others. But the point about Greek tragedy is that, yes, it's an eternal possession for the world, but it's got to keep being retranslated for each age and each audience.
And are there specific parts of the plays that are more difficult to translate than others?
Well, the choral odes, obviously, because Greek tragedy was musical theater, in effect. The long passages sung by the chorus were in fact sung and danced, and the poetry that's used in those passages is often very elevated, very elusive in its diction. In fact, it was written in a different dialect than the dialogue. So yeah, those can be very difficult. Fortunately, in the case of Oedipus and Antigone, with one exception, most of the choral odes are pretty straightforward, and I'm glad that in these productions we're going to be including all of the choral passages, whereas some modern productions tend to leave them out or cut them down because they don't seem relevant.
And what do you find is and this just leads me to my next question, what is the most, like, how are they relevant? Why do they still have an impact on a modern audience?
Well, the chorus is really, in some respects, the most important part of the tragedy. Because of the way the Western dramatic tradition has evolved, people tend to look at the actors, the characters, and their dialogue as the most important part, and then just leave the chorus out of the equation, or think of them like the chorus of a modern musical, who are just kind of there to fill in. But in fact, the chorus reflects on the action which has just passed, and those choral passages are important because they give the audience, as well as the chorus, a chance to pause in the action and relate what they've just seen to larger concerns, whether it's the gods or the human condition or whatever the chorus wants to talk about.
And I'm just wondering too, I mean, because you're really knowledgeable as, you know, in regards to how these plays were produced in their original form, you know, many centuries ago. What are the important elements of the production that you feel need to translate over to modern productions?
Well, one of them is, as I've just been talking about, the chorus. The chorus needs to be present. They need to be there all the time. They need to be a reminder to the audience that what they're watching is relevant to them as it is to the chorus. Also, the rhetoric of some of the dialogue. One of the things that the ancient Greeks loved about tragedies and about law cases and debates in the assembly was to see two opposing points of view presented at length and in a fairly formal manner so that they could hear both sides of an argument. So that's another important part of the tragedy. And it's one of the reasons why tragedy is not so popular now. because people don't just want to sit there and see someone talk for 2 pages in an argument, but it is a central part of the tragedy, and the chorus is watching this argument, and they help the audience see both points of view.
George, these plays are from a massive canon of plays from the Greeks, tragedies and otherwise. Why do you think these 2 plays in particular have stood, well, the test of time, I guess, basically?
Well, the canon isn't that massive. It's only about 30-odd plays that have survived, but there are many more that haven't survived. In the case of these 2 plays, they were studied in schools in the ancient world, but in some cases the plays have survived just by accident because they happen to be in a particular manuscript which survived. And of course, in the case of Oedipus, Aristotle's admiration of the play is an important factor.
And what was Aristotle's? Would this have been like a popular play of the day? You know, like.
Well, oddly enough, Sophocles only won 2nd prize at the competition at which Oedipus was presented, and that may have been to do with the peculiarities of the voting system more than whether people actually liked it or not. But Aristotle certainly thought it was the ideal tragedy in many ways, that the plot is so tightly constructed. Everything happens not just, as Aristotle said, not just after something else, but because of it. And that's one of the great attractions of it, which still survives today. I mean, people today say it's one of the best constructed plays that's ever been written.
And maybe you can talk a little bit, too, about the role of women, certainly the role of a title character in the play Antigone.
Yes, well, the Antigone is, of course, famous for its portrayal of a young woman rebelling against a predominantly male establishment, and that is one of many oppositions in the play, which would certainly have been very relevant to the Greeks. Whether or not they would have agreed necessarily, the original audience, with Antigone is another question altogether, but certainly male and female, state and family are 2 of the important oppositions in the play. Antigone is portrayed by Sophocles in many ways as a very masculine type of hero, or at least with masculine traits. She wants glory for what she's done, and she speaks often of that in terms which would normally be reserved for a male, a warrior wanting to die gloriously. She talks about having a glorious death, and she uses the same kind of language. So that would have struck the original audience as much as I hope it will strike our audiences.
Great. Thanks very much, George.
Okay.